Welcome to Skytech-Lens. On August 11, 2025, the Supreme Court delivered a historic rebuke to executive overreach, sending shockwaves through the nation's legal and economic landscape. The decision, closely watched by legal scholars and business leaders alike, marked a pivotal moment in the ongoing debate over the limits of presidential power. In a landmark ruling, the justices declared that the president's unilateral imposition of tariffs, without explicit congressional approval, was unconstitutional. The majority opinion emphasized that the Constitution grants Congress, not the executive branch, the authority to regulate international trade, a principle rooted in the nation's founding. This decision dismantled a key pillar of the Trump administration's trade policy, which had relied on sweeping tariffs to reshape America's economic relationships with the world. By reaffirming Congress's exclusive power over commerce, the court sent a clear message: the separation of powers is not a relic of the past, but a living safeguard for democracy. The ruling's immediate impact was seismic. Tariffs that had been imposed on hundreds of billions of dollars worth of goods, affecting everything from steel and aluminum to electronics and clothing, were suddenly invalidated. This not only upended global supply chains, but also triggered a massive financial liability for the U.S. government, which now faces the daunting task of refunding over $150 billion in duties collected from importers. For years, critics had argued that these tariffs amounted to a hidden tax on American consumers and businesses, driving up prices and straining household budgets. Now, with the court's decision, that burden has been laid bare, exposing the true cost of trade wars waged by executive fiat. The case was brought by a broad coalition of industries, trade associations, and state governments, all united in their belief that the Constitution's checks and balances must be preserved. Their victory is not just a win for their bottom lines, but for the principle that no branch of government should wield unchecked power. This decision transcends any single administration or political party. It stands as a reaffirmation of the balance of power at the heart of American democracy, reminding the nation that the rule of law endures even in turbulent times. As Congress prepares to reclaim its constitutional role in shaping the nation's economic destiny, the Supreme Court's ruling signals a profound recalibration of responsibilities. The future of American trade policy will now be forged not by executive order, but through the deliberative process of representative government, restoring the voice of the people to the heart of economic decision-making. At the heart of this pivotal legal battle was a fundamental question: how should the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEPA, be interpreted when it comes to presidential authority? The case brought into sharp focus the delicate balance between executive power and legislative intent, a tension that has shaped American governance for generations. The IEPA, passed in 1977, was designed to give the president tools to respond swiftly to extraordinary threats from abroad, but its boundaries have always been subject to debate. The law's original context was the Cold War era, when Congress sought to ensure the president could act decisively in the face of international crises such as economic warfare or threats to national security. Yet the language of the statute is both broad and in some ways ambiguous, leaving room for interpretation about what actions are truly authorized under its provisions. The Trump administration contended that the IEPA's sweeping language gave the president the power to impose tariffs during a declared national emergency, arguing that such economic measures were necessary to protect American interests. This interpretation, if accepted, would have significantly expanded the scope of executive authority, allowing the president to bypass Congress in setting trade policy whenever an emergency was declared. However, when the case reached the Supreme Court, the justices scrutinized the text of the IEPA with great care. They noted that nowhere in the statute does the word tariff appear, nor is there any explicit mention of long-term trade policy. The court emphasized that while the president does have significant emergency powers, those powers are not unlimited and must be grounded in clear statutory language. Ultimately, the court ruled that using the IEPA to establish a long-term regime of tariffs was not what Congress intended when it passed the law. The justices concluded that such a move would stretch the statute beyond its original purpose, effectively allowing the executive branch to usurp a core legislative function, regulating commerce and setting tariffs. This landmark decision marks a significant departure from the court's previous tendency to defer to the executive branch in matters of national emergency. By drawing a clear line, The justices signaled a renewed commitment to upholding the separation of powers, ensuring that emergency statutes are not used as a backdoor for expanding presidential authority. In reaffirming that the power to impose tariffs rests with Congress, the Supreme Court restored a vital constitutional boundary. This ruling not only shapes the future of trade policy, but also reinforces the principle that even in times of crisis, the rule of law and the roles assigned by the Constitution must be respected. The Supreme Court's decision is hailed as a check on the imperial presidency, curbing executive power. The use of IEPA for tariffs was seen as an encroachment on Congress's constitutional powers. The ruling reaffirms shared powers, countering the trend of executive overreach. Justices questioned the limits of presidential power if IEPA could be interpreted broadly. By striking down the tariffs, the court protects the constitutional order from future erosion. This decision challenges Congress to reclaim its responsibilities, ending executive encroachment. The United States Constitution, as the supreme law of the land, lays out a careful balance of powers among the branches of government. One of the most significant powers it grants is to Congress, the authority to tax, regulate commerce, and set tariffs. This power is not just a technical detail, it is a cornerstone of how the nation's economic policy is shaped and how the government ensures fairness and stability in trade, both domestically and internationally. Throughout American history, Congress has fiercely protected this authority. Lawmakers from all regions and backgrounds have debated, compromised, and collaborated to ensure that the interests of farmers, manufacturers, workers, and consumers are all taken into account. This process, though sometimes slow and contentious, has been essential in creating policies that reflect the nation's diversity and changing needs. Recently, the Supreme Court issued a landmark ruling that reasserts this traditional understanding of governance. The court emphasized that the power to tax and regulate trade is a fundamental responsibility of Congress, not something to be handed off lightly or without clear limits. Over the years, Congress has sometimes delegated portions of its authority to the executive branch, allowing the president to act swiftly in times of crisis or uncertainty. However, the use of the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA, to impose sweeping tariffs marked a dramatic departure from past practice, raising concerns about unchecked executive power. The Supreme Court's decision makes it clear, when Congress delegates its powers, it must do so with precision and transparency. Vague or open-ended grants of authority are not enough. The court's ruling reaffirms that the Constitution requires clear boundaries and accountability, especially when it comes to matters as impactful as trade and taxation. This decision signals a major reset in the relationship between Congress and the White House. It reminds both branches that collaboration and oversight are essential, and that the power to shape the nation's economic destiny ultimately rests with the representatives of the people. Going forward, any significant changes to tariffs or trade policy will require new legislation, debated and passed by Congress. This ensures that such decisions are made openly, with input from all sides, and that those responsible are held accountable to the American people. The challenge against presidential tariffs was led by a coalition of businesses and states. Tariffs acted as a direct tax, squeezing profit margins and raising consumer prices. The National Association of Manufacturers argued tariffs were a blunt instrument. Small businesses lacking resources joined the lawsuit for stability and predictability. States argued tariffs harmed local economies and reduced tax revenues. This coalition presented a compelling case that the executive branch overstepped its authority. Trump's reaction to the Supreme Court's decision was immediate and furious. He framed the ruling as a politically motivated assault on the nation. His rhetoric aimed to mobilize supporters against perceived enemies. Economists dismissed his warnings of economic depression as hyperbolic. Trump's response reinforced his outsider image, energizing his base. This reaction deepens the partisan divide over the judiciary's role. The Supreme Court's decision creates a massive economic challenge, refunding $150 billion in tariffs. This fiscal reversal transforms government revenue into a liability. The Treasury faces the daunting task of financing these repayments. Customs and Border Protection must process millions of claims, creating an administrative nightmare. Small businesses may struggle to recover refunds, facing delays and costs. The refund process acts as an economic stimulus but highlights the policy's disruptive legacy. This episode serves as a lesson in the unforeseen consequences of tariff policies. The Supreme Court's decision resets U.S. trade law, forcing Congress to reclaim its role. Congress must create a modern legal framework for international commerce. Lawmakers may amend IEPA to prevent its use for tariffs. Debates over trade policy will be contentious, requiring consensus. The ruling incentivizes Congress to act, ensuring democratic accountability. A new legislative framework could reduce future trade wars initiated by executive fiat. The challenge lies with Congress to build a durable legal framework for trade. The Supreme Court's decision is a profound statement about American democracy and the rule of law. It reaffirms the separation of powers as a safeguard against tyranny. The ruling preserves the constitutional architecture of the Republic. It emphasizes that major policy decisions must pass through the legislative process. The decision cautions against sacrificing constitutional process for expediency. It defends the long-term health of American democracy, checking executive overreach. This ruling reaffirms the principles of limited government and the rule of law. Thanks for watching a video and subscribe the channel now for more updates. Thanks.